Hey everyone, I hope you're all having a great day. Today I'm going to cover Chapter 6 of our textbook. This chapter is titled General Problems in Cross-Culture Methodology. Chapter 6 delves deep into the differences between different kinds of people and details how certain things can become lost in translation and how culture can affect data collection. Different cultures understand the same things in different ways. This is a major problem of transcultural equivalence. An example of cultures understanding things differently would be when her, Kim, and Kim asked Korean respondents in Chicago for their income. The Korean respondents stated their whole family's income instead of their individual income. Korean culture has families operate more as collectivist units than individuals, so Korean respondents identified their family's income instead of only stating their own. Another example of misunderstanding through different cultures involves Koreans again. The Korean language doesn't have a word for depressed, and there is no similar word with the concept Americans are familiar with in their language. The closest word that they have to depressed is melancholic. The concepts that are shared and not shared by all cultures goes into the etic versus emic categories in cognition and theoretical assumptions. Etic is a phenomenon that is usually shared across cultures. Emic is a phenomenon of aspects that are different within two cultures. These phenomena can have an etic core that is shared by two cultures, but also have emic aspects that differentiate them. Another problem is the problem of translation. Cross-cultural research has to work around the language barrier, which may prove difficult because some words may have the exact same definition, but used differently in the source language. An example of this could be the German word Freudenhaus, which means brothel, but directly translates to house of joy in English. Some guidelines researchers can use for translatable instruments are: 1. Use short sentences that are less than 16 words. Employ the active voice instead of using a passive voice. Repeat nouns instead of using pronouns. Avoid metaphors. Avoid subjunctives. Add context for key ideas. Avoid adverbs and prepositions. Avoid possessive forms. Use specific rather than general terms. Avoid using vague words. Use wording familiar to translators. And avoid sentences with two different verbs. Back to the ideas of etic versus emic, there is a way to distinguish which aspects of culture are which. The two processes used for this are back translation and decentering. Back translation is when someone bilingual translates from the source to the target language, and another blindly translates back to the source. When back translation is done multiple times, it is known as decentering. If a concept survives decentering, then it is assumed to be etic, but if a concept is eliminated, it is assumed to be emic, as it is not readily available. Everything about the interview matters when it comes to cross-cultural research. The interviewer's age, sex, ethnicity, and clothes may affect responses. Other aspects of the interview, like the time of the interview, the location, the interviewer's credentials, anonymity, and the length of the interview can also affect responses. Minorities also have a higher refusal rate when an interviewer of the dominant culture attempts to get their responses. Another issue in cross-cultural research is response errors. Linguistic and conceptual equivalence may disrupt foreigners' ability to respond to questions correctly. Cultural factors also play into this, an example being Korean people exaggerating or downplaying certain answers to make themselves look better. Biases may also affect responses. Some biases people may exhibit are rudeness bias, which is insensitivity or ignorance from the researchers, sucker bias, which is when the respondent gives fake answers for fun, and courtesy bias, which is when respondents give answers that they believe the interviewers want to hear. Cross-cultural research also has difficulty in the States because some ethnicities are so spread out that non-random samples are used to collect data. Another factor that may affect responses in cross-cultural research is culture shock. Culture shock is the anxiety caused by the loss of all familiar signs and symbols of social intercourse. Culture shock leads to stress, but there are different stages of culture shock that are both good and bad. The first stage is called the honeymoon stage, where a foreigner is fascinated by their new surroundings. This is typically early into their stay, but likely still a bad time to use them as respondents, as their opinions may be skewed. The second stage occurs when the foreigner becomes frustrated with their surroundings and the novelty of the new culture begins to wear off. The third stage is the growth stage, where foreigners begin to pick up on the language and maybe even gain a sense of humor. The fourth stage is when the foreigner has adjusted to the customs of the country and its language. This is probably the best time to ask the foreigner to be a respondent. Although culture shock can be stressful, there are positive impacts culture shock can have on a foreigner. Some reasons culture shock can be positive are: it can force foreigners to grow and learn in a new uncomfortable environment, and foreigners can reflect on themselves and their culture after they experience a new culture. Although there are many obstacles within cross-cultural research, it does have many benefits. Some of these benefits are the expansion of theoretical generalizability, refinement of concept, the increasing of range of variables, and promotion of contextual analysis.